Well, good morning and welcome to another edition of Elevenses Live. You're watching Kevin Williams here of Survival Skills Rider Training. We've got a packed show for you today. We'll be looking at the Ducati Museum, which is reopening, why a council has spent £14,000 on anti-motorcycle barriers that don't seem to stop motorcycles. Why research suggests that long-term riding of bikes for work could lead to muscle and joint problems. We'll ask if Honda's about to launch a new Transalp. We'll look at the Voge ER10 electric motorcycle available in Europe now. And today's discussion point is to look at the TRL Watch Out for Each Other campaign, and I'll be asking if it's actually looking the wrong way. So if you have anything that you want to say about the show, feel free to drop me a line. Questions I will answer if I possibly can. If you've got any comments, let me know. Feedback generally, anything you'd like me to cover in a future show. I'm always open to suggestions on that, so do feel free to drop me a line. We've got Paul looking in and Clive also appearing today. Good morning to you both, guys. Good to see you. So sit yourself down for the next 25-30 minutes or so, and don't forget you can join me here on Wednesdays and Sundays at 11 o'clock normally, and you can catch up with old shows here on Facebook, of course, but also over on my YouTube channel. So, okay, so first story of the day. Months of closure, of course, but Ducati Museum is finally ready to reopen its doors. Now, it's at Borgo Panigale near Bologna, and from there you can share, we're told, the essence and history of the Ducati brand. The cost for a visit is €17, but there are concessions as well. But if you can't make it in person, you can also book an online guided tour, both to the museum itself or a brand new tour, which is around the Ducati factory. Now, these online journeys are designed by the museum staff, and they will show you the history, the tradition, and how a Ducati is born. Each online tour is an interactive 45-minute event. You'll get a guide basically showing you around the museum or inside the factory. You'll see the production lines where the bikes are actually put together. You can book them both at Ducati.com. At least that's what the press release said. But you're going to need some patience, because the first thing is, if you go to Ducati.com, which is where the press release told me to go, you won't find a link to the museum tour. At least I couldn't find one on there. It's the front door to the Ducati site where they want to sell you a motorcycle. So it was a quick trip to Google. And if you type in Ducati Museum online journey, then you will immediately find the page you're looking for. Now, first time around, I actually found a page that defaulted to Italian. So that wasn't quite so easy to get on with. My Italian isn't very good. You will find, if you look very closely, top left, there is a tiny EN button, which switches it to English, but it did take me a moment to find that. Having got that far, you'll need to register on the site, of course, and hand over all your personal details, of course. Then finally, you can move on to purchasing the e-tickets to either the factory or the museum tours. Don't forget, of course, to purchase the ticket in English. It's easy to click on the wrong button and end up with the tour in Italian. And that takes you to the schedule. Finally, the museum online tour seems to happen on Tuesdays. The factory online tour is available on Saturdays. Both cost a not unreasonable €10, and during the virtual visit you can ask questions via a Q&A function on the platform. So that's something that you can think about if you're stuck for things to do during our fairly appalling British spring here. Okay, so that's the Ducati tour. Now, every now and again, I do see something in the news which leaves me slightly baffled in my thinking. So take a look at these. Let's just zoom in on them there. What you'll see is what is billed as a motorcycle inhibitor. And what are they for? Well, they have been put in place in Northampton in a park by Northamptonshire Council. And Deborah Henderson, who I believe is the woman there actually holding the barrier, who is the Community Protection Enforcement Officer, she explains the council receives frequent seasonal complaints with regards to motorcycle nuisance and its associated antisocial behaviour. And so together with our partner agencies, we're targeting this issue in a proactive manner. So these barriers, we're told, will restrict motorcycle entry to our parks, but mobility scooters and double buggies can still fit through. Other gaps in the fence are being plugged with a diamond rail. You can just see it down there in the bottom left corner. It's just basically a metal barrier at about knee height. How much has all this cost? Well, it's come to about £14,000. Now, what baffles me on this is that Susie Fletcher, who's the crime prevention officer, admits that these shoulder high barriers, which have actually gone in at some locations, these squeeze points aren't actually going to stop motorcyclists from getting in and out. So what's the point? Well, Sergeant Chris Stevens of Northamptonshire Police says these gates will slow them down and make it a little bit easier to issue a Section 59. In case you're wondering, a Section 59 is not a criminal conviction, but it's a power to seize and remove a vehicle that police officers believe is being driven inconsiderately, carelessly, and is causing or likely to cause alarm, distress, or annoyance to members of the public. Now, Section 59s are usually issued as a warning, but in certain circumstances, for example, a repeat Section 59 and some other circumstances, which allow the police to seize the vehicle there and then. Now, once the vehicle is seized, you have to pay to get it back, plus an amount for every day the vehicle's in store. Typically that could be as much as £150 plus £20 a day. So it's not an inconsiderable hit in the wallet. And of course, with the vehicle having been seized, it's reasonably easy to check if it's been stolen or modified illegally. But of course, this all assumes that the police can actually catch the nuisance biker before they ride back out of the gate that they got in through in the first place, or even simply lift it over that rail. If it's a lightweight off-road bike or a scooter, it really isn't going to be much of a challenge to get it over a knee-high barrier. So I kind of am left wondering exactly what kind of a deterrent this is likely to be to riders who want to get into a park and zoom around annoying people. I would suspect it's more likely to be seen as a challenge to be overcome than as a deterrent. But hey ho, what do I know about these things? Okay. Don't forget, you are tuned to Elevenses this morning. I'll be taking you through for the next 20 minutes or so with my show. If you want to contribute at the end of the show to help me keep them going, you can head over to my coffee page there, coffee.com/survival skills, and a small contribution over there will also open up a lot of articles from my Facebook archive. So if you do want to support me, that's fantastic. But these shows are for anybody who basically wants to find out a little bit more about motorcycling and some of the slightly less usual stories than you'll find in the normal press. So on to the next story then. As someone who's spent virtually all their working life on two wheels, you probably know, if you're a regular, that I spent 16 years as a courier, covered something over 500,000 miles in that time. I was quite interested to see just the other day that an experimental investigation has been carried out into the ergonomics of riding a motorcycle for long periods. And that study has actually been published in the International Journal of Human Factors and Ergonomics. So it is a pucker piece of research. It's the work of Mohd Parvez and Abid Ali Khan at the Aligarh Muslim University in Aligarh in India. And their study was prompted by the massive increase in the number of motorcycle couriers delivering packages and food out in India. But obviously that explosion has happened in other countries, including the UK. Now, they're concerned that long hours in the saddle on a daily basis can create health issues, and they cite poor posture, uncomfortable motorcycles, and the nature of the journeys. And they suggested that it might all contribute to discomfort and lead to long-term muscle and joint issues, as well as other problems. And what they looked at specifically was something called whole body vibration, WBV. Now, this is a new term to me, I have to admit, so I went and looked it up, of course. And it turns out that WBV, whole body vibration, is the physical shock that results to a driver or a rider, resulting from driving or riding over rough and uneven surfaces. The large shocks and jolts are transmitted through the seat or through the feet, and they're known to cause health issues such as back pain. And there is, in fact, an international standard, an ISO, which looks at how to evaluate your exposure to WBV. It's ISO 2631-1 if you're actually interested in that. Now, I did a quick look online on the research websites, and as far as I can see, there's plenty of work being done looking at the risks for operators of something like pneumatic drills or pile drivers, to see how it affects their bodies, and also for drivers of machinery such as tractors, forklift trucks, quarry and earth moving equipment. They've all been looked at in the past, and back pain itself is a significant problem for industry. It's known to cause the loss of around 5 million working days each year in the UK, which is absolutely astonishing figure, really. And that's either caused directly or made worse by exposure to injury and damage to your back at work. And for that reason, the UK's Health and Safety Executive have some leaflets on topics, and they state that reasons for back pain in drivers, for example, can include poor design of controls, making it difficult for the driver to operate the machine or the vehicle easily, or to see properly without twisting and stretching. And you could certainly see how that could apply to a motorcycle. Incorrect adjustments by the driver of the seat position and hand and foot controls, so that it is necessary to continually twist, bend, lean and stretch to operate the machine. Well, again, motorcycles are built for one theoretical person, the test rider, and everybody else has to adapt around them unless you happen to have identical body specifications, as it were, to the rider itself. So again, that applies to motorcycles. Sitting for long periods without being able to change posture. Well, yeah, motorcycles have a seat, they have a bars, they have the foot pegs, and those relationships between those positions don't change. If you ride a long time each day, you are basically sat in the same position. Poor posture. Well, again, you look at riders, you will definitely see riders who do not use good riding posture. So manual handling and lifting of loads. Well, unless you're unlucky, as I was a couple of times as a courier, most motorcycle loads are fairly light, but I did once or twice turn up to places where people seem to assume that I could carry something that would have loaded up a small van, quite frankly. You certainly have excessive exposure to whole body vibration, particularly shocks and jolts on a motorcycle. Many bikes do not have the kind of suspension that copes well with the potholes and speed bumps that we're all exposed to at the moment. And the final one in the HSE list there is climbing into or jumping down from a high cab. Well, I don't think really that applies to a motorcycle, I suppose, unless you bought an Africa Twin, perhaps. But what they do say is the risk increases whenever the operator is exposed to more than one of these factors at the same time. I think virtually all those factors there can be seen to apply to motorcycles, but this seems to be the first study of its kind which looks specifically at powered two-wheelers and specifically considerations the vibration and shock to be a major ergonomic risk factor for motorcyclists. So what did the research entail? Well, I did hit a bit of a brick wall when I tried to read the paper, because unfortunately it is behind a paywall, and I'm not forking out the $60 or whatever it costs to read the whole thing. But it seems that they got volunteers to ride a motorcycle, which appears to have been a simulator. And they rode it for 25 minutes at 30 kph, and they specifically looked at this whole body vibration problem as described in that ISO standard. Now, how they did that, I'm not sure. Presumably they wired the bike and the rider up with sort of little stress gauges, strain gauges, to see how much various bits of their body were moving around. But what they found was actually quite shocking, because they found that the WBV experienced by the riders on this test rig commonly exceeded the upper safety limit laid out by the ISO by more than 5 times. And here is something that I did find particularly interesting. They found that the effect was worse on riders who adopted a posture where they leant forwards over the fuel tank rather than riding upright with a straight back. Now, how far forward they were leaning, I'm not entirely sure, but I gather, or I got the impression from reading it, that they weren't talking about a full-on race bike sort of style position. So they're not talking about a GSXR, they're talking about a fairly modest forward lean. And their explanation is that in the leaning position, there's greater activity in the muscles up in the upper back and the shoulders, which would lead to greater fatigue for the ride. And I can certainly admit that on long rides, you do get a lot of pain across the shoulders if you're not regular riding. But they also suggested that riding with an erect posture, an upright posture, actually reduces this whole body vibration and the upper back fatigue, but at the expense of increased discomfort in the buttocks and lower back. Now, again, I would certainly agree with that from my dispatch experience. But I'm not entirely convinced that the leaning position creates greater fatigue than the upright position. Now, as a courier, a typical day for me involved probably 8 or 9 hours in the saddle, most of which I would have been riding. And it wasn't uncommon that I spent 12 hours plus in the saddle. I could quite easily leave home at 9 o'clock in the morning and not get back till well after 9 o'clock at night. You know, sometimes days weren't stretched after midnight. So what was I riding? Well, I can honestly say that the most comfortable bikes that I have ridden for dispatching and as an instructor are bikes which combine two things: a modest forward lean onto the handlebars, so not a flat on the tank GSXR position, and yes, I've ridden those bikes too, but something like my Hornet or my XJ6, so sort of the standard riding position, as it's sometimes called, where you do have a bit of lean forward onto the bars. Some of your weight is on the grips, but they have to be combined with foot pegs, which are relatively far back. And the most comfortable position I found is a bike which combines that modest forward lean with foot pegs, which are actually just about under the hip joint, because that allows you to brace your legs and take some of the shock through the leg muscles rather than having it smashing straight into the bottom of your spine. And this is the problem with the conventional sit up and beg position that you typically find on something like a lightweight scooter. The rider's spine is upright and their legs are at a right angle in front of them. The hip is square, the thigh is straight out in front, and the lower leg is straight down. So the problem is that there is no absorption of the impact through the leg. It basically goes straight into the bottom of the spine. You can mitigate that with a shock absorbing seat, of course, but looking at the average basic motorcycle, the seats aren't fantastic, and there will be, even with the best seat in the world, you're still going to get some of that shock transferred vertically up the spine. Now, if you want the worst of all possible worlds, go and look at a 1970s Triumph Bonneville, and what you'll find is that you had that riding position with your legs, with your thigh more or less parallel to the ground, and the foot peg was vertically under your knee, but the body position was leaning forward. So you were bent over at the waist which meant you had to take some of your weight on your arms, but you couldn't absorb the impact through your legs. So I have to say that all the bikes I've ever ridden, and that includes a couple of Harley Davidsons and things like that, the old Bonneville, had the worst of all possible riding positions. Now, I can't tell you whether or not the simulator had movable foot pegs, but I think those results need to be checked on a fairly sophisticated machine that allows for a whole variety of riding positions to be tested out. They need to be changed in fairly subtle ways. Nevertheless, the team then suggested that there are need for economic interventions to reduce this problem of whole body vibration for couriers and any other motorcyclist who spends many hours on the bike each day. A motorcycle instructor will probably fall into that category. And so they suggest that could involve a redesign of motorcycle seats, redesign of suspension, perhaps within the seat, which I suppose is going back to the old sprung saddles of the pre-war era. And they also suggest that there could be regulation involving monitoring, controlling hours on the bike, journey lengths and speed in the same way that truck drivers are regulated. Well, I'm sure that'll go down like a lead balloon with motorcyclists generally. But there we go. So anyway, that is an interesting paper. And if I can get hold of the full thing and read it, I will at some future time. Right. Okay. So what else have we got to talk about? The Honda Transalp, you may recall, first appeared back in the late 1980s. It used a derivation of the early 80s VT500 engine. It was initially a good seller. The model ran for almost a quarter of a century in various versions before the sales fizzled out, and it was eventually pulled about 9 years ago, if I remember correctly. I rode a Transalp a couple of times, and I have to say that I liked the engine. What I didn't like was the access to the engine. It was horrid. It being a V-twin that was in line with the frame, you couldn't get to anything without major dismantling. I had a CX500, and I could do a full service on that in about 40 minutes. The VT500, it took 40 minutes to get to the rear plug cap, let alone taking any of the plugs out. And there were 4 of them as well, as you may recall. So basically, lack of development, some problems with access, and generally the bike fizzled out. But there are rumours abounding now that the Transalp is likely to be revived in fairly short order, not least because Honda actually filed a new trademark for the name Transalp back in March 2021. Now, the latest report suggests the new bike is likely to appear at the end of season shows, probably being revealed at the ECIMA show in Milan, which I believe is in November. Now, Honda, you probably know, already have a fairly serious lineup of adventure motorcycles. They start with the CB500X, you've then got the NC750X, and you've got the newly enlarged Africa Twin, the CRF 1100. The thing is, of course, the bottom 2 bikes really are road bikes with some styling. And whilst you can tackle some modest off-road stuff, they're not going to be trundling across the desert on them. The Africa Twin is actually fairly capable off-roader. I haven't ridden one, but that's the impression I get from reading what other people have said. So the thinking is that the Transalp could come in somewhere around the 800 to 850cc bracket, which would kind of position it in terms of engine size between the lower end of the models and the Transalp, the Africa Twin rather, so it wouldn't take away sales from the Africa Twin. But it's suspected it will probably have more off-road ability than the 2 smaller bikes. But it would be lighter as well as less powerful, of course, and probably narrower and more nimble too. So think probably Yamaha Tenere 700 rather than Triumph Tiger 900. That would be my guess for the bike. As soon as I get any more details on that, I will, of course, let you know. Now, at the other end of the performance spectrum, the Voge ER10 is the latest motorcycle to be heading to Europe. which is powered by an electric motor. So that's the bike itself. It's Chinese, and the Chinese seem to be following the same strategy that the Japanese used very successfully half a century ago to undermine the British bike industry by targeting the bottom end of the market, a market that the Japanese are largely ignoring at the moment. So yes, it is another Chinese motorcycle, but this time, rather than being sort of low-powered scooter equivalent, it's actually a 125 equivalent. Now, it was first unveiled last year at the Milan show. The ER10 has a 100 km/h, 62 mile/h top speed. The higher power motor there is a 6 kilowatt unit with a peak output of 14 kilowatts, and it's actually produced by Suron, who themselves build complete motorcycles. But basically, it's billed as offering a cleaner, lower maintenance motorcycle for urban commutes, and of course, it can be ridden on a CBT. The motorcycle itself has a swing arm mounted engine. Now, if I just zoom in on the motor, you can see it there, and you can also see my immediate concern with it. You've got a huge number of wires which are totally exposed to the outside world. Now, I don't know about you, but I can just see some young, well, let's not generalize. Somebody with negative intentions taking a pair of wire cutters to those and chopping through the wires from your battery. Now, that might not be a good idea because, of course, the battery pack is a 60 volt 70 amp hour thing with a capacity of just over 4,000 kilowatts, so you could do yourself some serious damage if you did try to cut through those wires. But they do look horribly exposed to me, and that's probably, to me, the worst point of the bike. I really do think that needs to be undercover. Anyway, as long as nobody does cut through your power cables, the bike should be good for around 75 miles at urban sort of trickle speed. That's calculated as a sort of 18 mile/h average. But obviously at a higher speed, if you zipped into town on a sort of 60 mile/h road, the commuting distance would come down. But one big plus is the weight. Now, a lot of people still have this idea that electric motorbikes are overweight. The very first ones were, but if you've ridden anything that's been built in the last 4 or 5 years, you'll find that they really are not heavy at all. And this one weighs in at just 115 kilograms, which is 250 pounds in old money. And that actually makes it lighter than a lot of its petrol engined rivals in the same sort of category of a sort of a 60 plus mile/h 125. So it should make it nice and easy for relative novices to handle. You may have to bite the bullet a bit on price. The Italian market is where the bike's already been introduced, and you'll find it's got a price tag of €6,590. So it'll be about 5,500, I think, in pounds on the current exchange rate. But even so, that is a fairly competitive price. The Vespa Electrica electric scooter has just been announced. That's got a 70 kph, which is 45 miles an hour top speed, and that is similarly priced. So will it sell? Well, I've started to see more and more electric motorcycles and scooters excuse me, around on the roads. So I wouldn't be too surprised that when it arrives in the UK that we will see more and more of these out and about. Okay, so on to the final piece. I mentioned last week on Sunday that Transport for London and the Met Police have launched a yet another safety campaign. This one is urging road users to look out for each other. And it's basically been launched amidst concern about the number of motorcyclists being killed or seriously injured on London's roads. And a statement that was made was that motorcycling must be getting more dangerous because there was less mileage covered by vehicles on London's roads last year due to the pandemic, but the number of deaths stayed the same at 31 in 2020 as in 2019. Now, I went back a few years to March 2016, and what I looked at was this document here. Let me get the picture up for you. There it is. Let me zoom in a bit, and what you can see is the Easy Rider Improving Motorcycle Safety on London Roads document, which was produced in March 2016, and you'll see it was by the London Assembly. So what's all that about? Well, the opening paragraphs, one of them said, arguably motorcyclists have been overlooked in public discussion about road safety in recent years. However, 36 motorcyclists were killed on London's roads last year, so that would be 2015, a death toll that is unacceptably high and part of a bigger picture of collisions and injuries affecting motorcyclists, many of them life-changing in their seriousness. Any safety agenda for London's roadscape must feature tackling this as an issue of priority. So that was 2016, 5 years ago. Well, the first thing to say is that deaths are actually down a bit, aren't they? Now, you do have to be aware of an issue called regression to the mean. When you're looking at relatively small numbers, and 36, 31, they are pretty small numbers. It's easy to say that you've created a 10 or 12% drop when you're really just looking at a couple of units. So we have to be cautious. We have to look at much longer term data. So one of my immediate criticisms of last week's release from TfL and the police is that they're comparing 2 years, 31 and 31, and saying it must be worse this year because there was less traffic. You need a longer baseline. You need to be able to look over at least 10 years to get an idea of a trend across a period of time to see whether it's going down, whether it's going up, or whether it's just staying the same. You can't bullet point to numbers from adjacent years and try to really draw any serious conclusion from them. Now, the second thing that I pulled out of that document was a warning about where these crashes happen. And once again, what they turned up was the old chestnut. To quote TfL data indicates that many collisions occur when a car turns into the path of a rider. And the second thing they flagged up was the data showed that many of the riders who died or suffered serious injuries were riding low-powered machines, particularly including scooters with an engine size up to 125. So what do we know? Well, we know exactly the same as came out in that document in 2016. They drew pretty much the same conclusions, that collisions at junctions need to be addressed and that young riders are most at risk. What did the 2016 document say? Well, one of the things it proposed was re-engineering some junctions to try to open up lines of sight to make it easier for drivers to see motorcycles. As I keep pointing out on Silence of Being Seen, it's easy to say drivers don't look properly because when these collisions happen, it's usually the driver who's at fault. But as I repeatedly point out, there are 1.2 million motorcycles across the whole of the country. We cover about 4 billion miles in those years riding. There are 40 million car drivers, plus van drivers, lorry drivers, bus drivers, and all the rest. And how many fatal accidents are there across the entire country? Well, around 100. So if you think about the actual numbers of serious and fatal collisions, they're tiny. And what that means is drivers must see the vast majority of motorcycles the vast majority of time. So to claim there's something faulty about the way drivers look for bikes is obscuring the point. Yes, every now and again, that search does break down, drivers don't spot motorcycles and things go horribly wrong. But to simply say that drivers have to look harder is not the answer. Most drivers will go through their entire driving career without ever causing one of these problems. Lembit Opik, who's you probably know, the Director of Communications and Public Affairs for the Motorcycle Action Group, he is also in support of the idea that drivers should look harder. The stock bike program run by, launched by somebody called Dr. Ian Mew. He's air ambulance medic. I met him some years ago when I was giving one of the Science of Being Seen presentations down in Kent. He was along with a local team in Dorset to see what we were doing. He has run a campaign in Dorset to try to get riders to wear brighter colours to use their lights. And again, I just think we are looking at this from the wrong end of the telescope. The vast majority of collisions with turning vehicles, the rider can actually see what's happening in the seconds leading up to the crash. Cars do not simply materialize out of nowhere. Motorcycles may do, because they are easily hidden, they're easily concealed, and we know many of the visual perception problems that make it difficult for drivers to see bikes. But usually the motorcycle can actually see the turning car for several seconds before the collision happens. So I honestly think that we have to stop thinking of this as a driver mistake, and we have to start thinking about it in terms of what can be mitigated by the rider to prevent the collision themselves. It's the way I switched to riding as a courier. I had a few near misses in my early days, and very, very quickly realized that I actually had to look after myself rather than expecting somebody to see me in high vis and with my lights on. So I know this is a controversial view, but I really think that we actually need to do that, and it's no good simply rolling out the same old message. As I said, we can see from that London Assembly document that research was done 5 years ago, and so we know what the problem is. We know where the issues lie. Where can we do the work? Well, if the majority of riders who are being impacted by these crashes are novices or riding low-powered motorcycles on L plates, then the answer has to be CBT. I have long said that, in my opinion, CBT is not fit for purpose. It certainly doesn't prepare riders for riding in a busy environment like London. 2 hours on the road is the minimum requirement, and of course most people doing CBT want to get through it as cheaply and as quickly as possible. They see it as a hurdle rather than as an opportunity to learn, unfortunately. So I don't know quite how we revise CBT, but I do honestly think that some training needs to be put into CBT, which connects maneuvers like the emergency stop to real life hazards. It's no good getting a rider able to do an emergency stop with the back wheel 3 feet in the air if they don't recognize the circumstances in which they're going to need to use that emergency stop. I've long said that some inexpensive simulators would be one way of doing this. You don't need anything highly technical. A computer home PC will happily run a program which will display a scene on the screen. You only have to look at a game to see what you can do with graphics. If you put 3 screens up, you can get a sort of a wraparound effect where you actually have to look around to see what's going on around you rather than just a flat single screen in front of you. That's fairly trivial to power. And then you can throw hazards at the rider on the simulator. It really isn't an issue. So upscaling CBT, upskilling riders on CBT by changing the angle of the puzzles that we set them. It's all very, as I say, it's all very well getting people really good at doing full-on emergency stops. They have to understand how to use them, and this is the problem. We're not teaching riders how to take evasive action in real life. We're teaching them how to do it in a car park. And the same applies to the Module 1 test part of the actual bike test itself. When was the last time any of you out there did a figure of 8 in the road? It's a completely pointless maneuver in itself. The skill is useful. If you can do a figure of 8, you can maneuver through traffic. You can do things like hairpin bends. You should be able to get around something like a mini roundabout. But unless you put these skills in context with the exercise, then people really don't understand why they're doing these things. And then as soon as they've passed the test, of course, they forget it all. So, all right, that brings me to the end of this morning's little rant. Hopefully one day somebody will pick up on this alternative approach to motorcycle safety, and we'll start seeing that motorcycling, there are solutions, I think, to these problems, but what we have to do is just go back and look at old documents, and when we find that we're asking the same questions year in, year out, producing the same tired old solutions which don't work year in, year out, really isn't the answer. So that's it for me today. Nick has also looked in and said hello. Good morning to you, Nick. I trust if you've got anything that you feel that you want to say about this, do drop me a line. I'm always open to other viewpoints. It is as I say, it is something I think that we're long overdue looking at with a new perspective. All right, anyway, that's it for today. Don't forget to bookmark the page if you want to get an alert to these shows. There is a bell icon that you can see apparently on the live video, but if you're watching on PC, you have to go full screen to see it. Click on that and you'll be subscribed and you'll get an alert for each show. All the old Elevenses are over on my Survival Skills UK channel on YouTube, and I'll be putting a new 60-second safety video up on Facebook and on YouTube tomorrow. So that's it. Back on Sunday with the next show. For the moment, stay safe out there and see you again soon. Thanks for looking in. Bye for now.